Imagine standing in a hushed museum gallery, your eyes fixed on a sword resting in a softly lit case. Its blade is worn, its hilt marked with a faded red cross, and the placard beside it claims this very weapon was once carried by a Knight Templar. But here's the question that lingers in the air, almost as tangible as the artifact itself. How can we truly know? How do we separate what's real from what's imagined, history from legend? This isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about stepping into a mystery that spans centuries, where every scratch, every mark, and every document tells a story waiting to be deciphered. The quest to authenticate Templar relics is far more than an academic exercise. It's a journey that takes us into the heart of medieval legacy and the modern science of preservation. These objects, whether swords, seals, or sacred texts, carry with them the weight of an order that shaped history, warriors who are also bankers, monks who are also soldiers, and guardians whose sudden fall gave rise to whispers, secrets, and myths that still capture our imagination today. But behind those myths lies a painstaking process, one that blends cutting-edge technology with fragile, centuries-old records. It's a dance between what was written and what can be proved, between folklore and fact. In this video, we'll explore how museums and historians trace the origins of these enigmatic relics, verifying their authenticity through methods ranging from radiocarbon dating to archival detective work. We'll uncover the controversies that surround them, the fascinating stories of how they survived through time, and why getting their provenance right matters now more than ever. This is about preserving truth in a world where misinformation can spread as quickly as legend. So join us as we delve into the shadows of the past, not just to admire these treasures, but to understand them, to piece together the puzzle of what's real, what's imagined, and why the legacy of the Templars continues to haunt and inspire us. To truly grasp why a single Templar artifact can captivate historians and spark such intense debate, we need to journey back to the very beginning, to the dusty roads of the Holy Land in the 12th century. Picture this: the year is 1119, and the First Crusade has successfully captured Jerusalem. But the routes leading to the sacred city are perilous, plagued by bandits and marauding soldiers. In response, a small band of French knights, led by Hugues de Payens, forms a new kind of brotherhood. They take monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but their mission is uniquely martial: to protect the waves of pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. They call themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, a name derived from their headquarters on the site of the ancient Jewish temple. We know them simply as the Knights Templar. Their humble beginnings belie the incredible power they would swiftly accumulate. The Templars' unwavering dedication and military prowess quickly won them the favor of the Church and European nobility. In 1129, they received a formal endorsement from the Catholic Church at the Council of Troyes, and with that, donations of land, money, and sons from noble families began flooding in. They became more than just soldiers. They innovated early forms of banking, allowing pilgrims to deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them in the Holy Land. They built a vast network of fortifications, commanderies, and farms that stretched from the Middle East across the entirety of Europe, amassing incredible wealth and influence. They were, in effect, the first multinational corporation, answerable only to the Pope himself. This meteoric rise makes their catastrophic fall all the more shocking. By the early 14th century, the Crusader states had fallen. and the Templars' purpose was being questioned by powerful figures who also coveted their treasure. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, saw an opportunity. On Friday, October 13, 1307, he launched a coordinated dawn raid, arresting hundreds of Templars across France on trumped-up charges of heresy, blasphemy, and corruption. Under brutal torture, many knights confessed to these fictitious crimes. The Pope, Clement V, initially resisted but ultimately yielded to Philip's pressure, dissolving the order in 1312. Their last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in Paris, legend says cursing the king and pope from the flames. This abrupt and violent dissolution is the crucible in which the modern mystery of their relics was forged. With the order officially suppressed, their immense possessions were supposed to be transferred to their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. But in the chaos of arrests and seizures, countless items, from swords, seals, and religious vestments to chests of gold and invaluable documents, simply vanished. Some were looted, others were hidden by sympathetic allies or perhaps even by the Templars themselves who escaped capture. This immediate scattering of their material culture means that almost no artifact comes with a clean, uninterrupted history from a Templar commandery directly to a modern museum display case. Every potential relic has a gap of centuries to account for, a void quickly filled by rumor, legend, and the temptation of forgery. This is the profound historical context that makes the authentication of any Templar object not just a scientific challenge, but a deep dive into one of history's most enduring and dramatic stories. So what exactly are we looking for when we talk about a Templar relic? It's not just one single type of object, but a whole universe of items that served both practical and profound symbolic purposes for this unique order of warrior monks. At the most fundamental level, we can categorize these artifacts into several distinct groups. First, there are the weapons and armor, the longswords, shields, and chainmail that defined their military role. These weren't just tools of war, they were often consecrated objects, blessed by the Church for their holy mission. Then we have the religious and ceremonial items, like intricately carved crosses, chalices, or the seals used to authenticate official documents. The personal effects form another category. Things like the distinctive white mantles with the red cross that they wore over their armor, or rings bearing their insignia. And perhaps most crucially, we have the documentary evidence, charters, financial ledgers, and letters that provide a direct, written link to their daily operations and vast network of commanderies across Europe and the Holy Land. The most sought-after relics are those that carry the unmistakable fingerprints of the order itself. This often means identifying specific markings that were unique to the Templars. The most famous of these is the Red Cross Pate, a cross with arms that are narrow at the center and broaden out into curves at the ends, which was prominently displayed on their white tunics and shields. But it goes beyond that. Inscriptions can be a powerful clue. A sword blade or a seal might be engraved with the name of a specific preceptory, like the Temple in London or the commandery at Toma in Portugal. The very materials and craftsmanship can also speak volumes. A sword's metallurgy might be consistent with the specific steel-making techniques of 12th century France, or the weave of a textile fragment might match others found in the archaeological remains of a known Templar site. However, this is where the waters become incredibly muddy. For centuries, the romantic aura surrounding the Templars has made their relics highly desirable, and where there is desire, forgery inevitably follows. The line between a genuine artifact and a clever fake is often blurred by time and intention. A medieval sword from the right period, but made for a different knightly order, could have its hilt altered centuries later to add a Templar cross, instantly multiplying its value and mystique. The 19th century was a particularly fertile period for such creations, as a wave of Gothic revivalism and fascination with secret societies created a booming market for Templar memorabilia. Skilled artisans of the era produced stunningly convincing replicas, sometimes even using genuinely old materials repurposed from other objects, making them a nightmare to detect without modern scientific tools. This rich diversity of objects, from the brutally functional to the deeply sacred, and the equally diverse challenges in verifying them, is what makes the museum curator's job so complex. It's not just about asking, is this old, but could this only have belonged to a Templar? Understanding these categories and the inherent difficulties in each is the essential first step. It frames the entire authentication process, moving us from the realm of pure legend into the meticulous world of historical detective work, where every scratch, every chemical signature, and every line of faded Latin text becomes a piece of a much larger puzzle. Think of provenance as a historical passport for an artifact, a detailed, chronological record of every hand it has passed through, from its creation to the present day. This unbroken chain of custody is the single most critical factor in authenticating any historical object, but for Templar relics, it becomes an absolute necessity. Unlike an Egyptian statue that might have been unearthed in a 20th century archaeological dig with clear context, a Templar sword or cross has a far more treacherous journey to account for. Its story doesn't begin in the ground. It begins in the chaotic aftermath of the Order's sudden dissolution in the early 14th century. To prove an object is genuinely Templar, experts must attempt to trace its ownership back through time, navigating a labyrinth of auctions, private collections, and often cryptic historical notations, hoping to bridge that 700-year gap. The ideal provenance for a Templar relic would read like a perfect historical novel. It might start with an entry from the inventory of a specific commandery, perhaps in a papal bull ordering the transfer of assets after 1312. Then, perhaps a mention in the will of a nobleman who was granted the item by the crown. It could surface in the ledger of a Renaissance-era antiquarian, then later in the collection of an 18th-century aristocrat with a taste for chivalric history, before finally being sold at a reputable auction house in the 1900s. Each transaction, each mention in a letter or inventory, is a verifiable link in the chain. The more detailed and documented each link is, the stronger the case for authenticity becomes. This paper trail acts as a shield against doubt, providing a narrative that supports the object's physical characteristics. However, such a pristine and continuous history is the exception, not the rule. For the vast majority of purported Templar artifacts, the provenance is fragmented, incomplete, or suspiciously convenient. The most common red flag is what experts call a gap, a period of decades or even centuries where the object simply disappears from the historical record. It might have a convincing 20th century history, but its whereabouts during the 1800s are a complete mystery. This is profoundly significant because the 19th century was a golden age for forgery. The Romantic movement's obsession with the medieval past, fueled by novels like those by Sir Walter Scott, created an insatiable market for Templar memorabilia. Cunning artisans responded by producing a flood of convincing fakes, from swords and shields to seals and documents. Many of these forgeries were then given false provenances, backdated with fabricated bills of sale or forged entries in antique ledgers to make them appear older and more legitimate. This is why provenance research is such a meticulous and often skeptical discipline. Investigators must treat every document with a degree of suspicion, cross-referencing auction catalogs, personal correspondence, and library archives to confirm the details. They look for anachronistic language in a bill of sale or check if a collector who supposedly owned the item in 1850 was even alive at the time. A provenance that seems too good to be true, one that conveniently fills all the gaps with grandiose but unverifiable stories, is often the hallmark of a clever forgery. The absence of a clear history isn't definitive proof an object is fake, but it shifts the burden of proof entirely onto the physical evidence itself, making the job of authentication infinitely more difficult. In this high-stakes detective story, the paper trail is the first and most crucial clue. These historical documents are our first and often most tantalizing window into the Templar world, but that window is frequently smudged, cracked, and offers only a partial view. Think of medieval chronicles, papal bulls, and those sparse inventory lists from remote commanderies not as a complete catalogue, but as a collection of scattered puzzle pieces, some of which might even be from a different box altogether. They offer invaluable clues, yes, but they come with a set of inherent limitations that every serious historian must constantly navigate. The first major hurdle is their sheer incompleteness. The Templars were meticulous record keepers for their time, but centuries of war, fires, simple decay, and the deliberate destruction following their dissolution have ravaged their archives. What survives is often a tiny fraction of what once existed, a handful of random pages from a vast missing ledger. Then there's the issue of bias. The most detailed accounts we have of the Templars' final days come from their accusers during the trials. King Philip IV's officials were not objective journalists, they were prosecutors building a case. Their records meticulously detail the goods confiscated from Templar houses, lists of swords, chalices, and quantities of grain. But they rarely provide the kind of detailed, physical descriptions that would allow us to match a specific artifact today to an entry on that list 700 years ago. A trial record might note one silver cross, but it won't describe its specific shape, its exact dimensions, or any unique engraving that could serve as a fingerprint. This leaves a vast ocean of room for interpretation and, unfortunately, for error. An 18th century antiquarian might see a generic medieval cross and, fueled by local legend, confidently but incorrectly link it to that vague entry in the trial documents. This problem of misattribution becomes even more treacherous when we consider the historical revivals that occurred centuries later. The Romantic era of the 19th century, in particular, was a period of intense and often uncritical fascination with the medieval past. Writers, artists, and even some scholars of this period weren't always concerned with strict historical accuracy. They were crafting an idealized, dramatic vision of chivalry. This environment became a fertile ground for the creation of fabricated documents. Clever forgers, capitalizing on the trend, produced everything from fake letters between Templar officials to entire genealogies tracing a family's descent from a secret Templar lineage. These documents were often aged using techniques like staining them with tea or baking them to make the paper appear brittle and old. Many of these forgeries were so convincing that they found their way into private collections and even some early public archives, where they were sometimes mistaken for genuine medieval records for decades, muddying the waters of historical research and creating false trails that experts still have to untangle today. This is why museums and historians can never rely on documents alone. The historical paper trail, for all its priceless value, is often a roadmap filled with gaps, detours, and a few deliberately misleading signs. Acknowledging these limitations isn't a sign of failure. It's the first, crucial step toward a more rigorous and honest form of investigation. It forces us to look beyond the written word and to embrace a more holistic approach, one where the silent testimony of the object itself must be heard. This imperative to seek corroborating evidence is what naturally leads us into the realm of material science, where the secrets locked within the very fabric of an artifact can either corroborate the historical story or reveal a fascinating deception. When the historical record falls silent or offers only ambiguous clues, the artifacts themselves must speak. This is where the powerful tools of modern material science enter the investigation, transforming a museum's conservation lab into a high-tech forensic studio. Here, objects that have been shrouded in legend for centuries are subjected to a battery of non-invasive and minimally invasive tests, each designed to interrogate the relic and extract truths about its origin that are invisible to the naked eye. This isn't about replacing the historian's expertise, but rather arming it with irrefutable physical data, moving the authentication process from the realm of informed speculation into the domain of empirical evidence. One of the most fundamental questions is simply how old is it? For organic materials like a leather scabbard, a wooden reliquary box, or even a parchment document, radiocarbon dating provides a powerful answer. This technique measures the steady decay of the radioactive isotope carbon-14 within a sample. By calculating the ratio of carbon-14 to stable carbon, scientists can determine with a remarkable degree of accuracy when the plant or animal that provided the material died. Imagine a piece of vellum claimed to be from a 13th century Templar charter. If radiocarbon dating reveals the animal skin was prepared in the 17th century, the document is immediately exposed as a forgery, regardless of how convincing the handwriting may appear. It's a chronological anchor point that can instantly validate or dismantle an object's entire story. But for the metal and stone objects more commonly associated with the Templars, their swords, seals, and architectural fragments, different techniques are required. This is where X-ray fluorescence, or XRF, becomes an indispensable tool. In essence, an XRF spectrometer beams X-rays at a small area of an object, causing the atoms within it to fluoresce or emit their own unique secondary X-rays. Each element on the periodic table emits a signature pattern of energy, acting like a chemical fingerprint. By holding the handheld device a few inches from, say, the blade of a sword, a conservator can within seconds determine its exact elemental composition. This can reveal anachronisms instantly. A sword purported to be from the 1200s should be made of wrought iron with specific trace impurities. If the XRF scan detects high levels of elements like manganese or nickel common in modern steels but not in medieval metallurgy, it raises a massive red flag. Similarly, analyzing the enamel on a cross can detect modern zinc-based white pigments that would have been unknown to a medieval artisan who would have used lead-based whites instead. Another layer of analysis comes from spectroscopy, particularly techniques like Raman spectroscopy. This method uses laser light to probe the molecular vibrations within a material, effectively identifying specific compounds rather than just elements. It's exceptionally useful for analyzing pigments, dyes, and corrosion products. For instance, the iconic red cross on a Templar mantle might be examined with Raman spectroscopy. If the analysis identifies the red pigment as synthetic alizarin, a colorant first created in the 19th century, it proves the cross was added hundreds of years after the order's dissolution, severely undermining the artifact's overall authenticity. These tools don't just look for what is there, they also look for what shouldn't be there, uncovering chronological contaminants that betray a forger's hand. The true power of this scientific approach, however, lies not in any single test, but in the convergence of evidence. A sword might pass its metallurgical XRF analysis with flying colors, showing a composition perfectly consistent with 13th century European smithing. But perhaps thermoluminescence dating on a minute sample of the clay from the crucible used to make it suggest a later date. This creates a fascinating conflict that requires deeper investigation. Perhaps the blade is genuinely old but was later remounted with a new hilt bearing a forged Templar insignia. Science provides the hard data, but it is the expert's role to interpret these results within the full context of the object's design, craftsmanship, and historical provenance. A scientific finding is rarely a simple, real, or fake verdict. It's a series of clues that, when combined with the historical detective work, builds a much more nuanced and confident conclusion about an object's true journey through time. Now let's bring all these methods to life with a real-world example, a case that perfectly illustrates the delicate dance between hope, science, and lingering doubt. Housed within the immense collection of the Louvre Museum in Paris is a formidable longsword. Its blade is long and straight. Its hilt is worn smooth by the imagined grips of countless hands across centuries, and etched into its crossguard is that iconic symbol, a cross pate. For decades, it has been displayed with the tantalizing attribution of possibly belonging to a Knight Templar, a physical echo of the Order's martial power. But how did it earn this label, and why do experts still debate its origins behind the scenes? Its story is a masterclass in modern authentication. The investigation into this sword began not in a laboratory, but in a library. Provenance researchers first traced its documented history, uncovering that it first appeared in the collection of a 19th-century French antiquarian, a gentleman known for his passion for medieval arms. This immediately raised eyebrows. As we've discussed, the 19th century was a peak era for historical forgeries, a time when Romanticism often trumped rigor. The sword's sudden appearance 700 years after the Templars' dissolution, with no paper trail leading further back, was a significant red flag. It was entirely possible that this was a genuine medieval weapon that had been later altered. Perhaps the cross was added to increase its value and mystique, or even a complete contemporary fabrication designed to fool eager collectors. This murky historical emergence meant the sword entered the scientific phase of analysis under a cloud of skepticism. This is where the metallurgists took center stage. Using X-ray fluorescence, they scanned the blade's surface, mapping its elemental composition. The results were telling. The steel was a high-quality wrought iron with trace amounts of phosphorus and slag inclusions, a signature perfectly consistent with smithing techniques from the 12th and 13th centuries in France. There were no anachronistic elements, no traces of modern alloys that would have given away a later creation. Furthermore, the craftsmanship itself became evident. The sword's balance, the taper of the blade, and the method of its construction were all meticulously compared to a database of weapons recovered from securely dated archaeological sites, like those from castle excavations or known battlefields. In every physical aspect, the sword checked all the boxes. It was without a doubt a genuine medieval artifact, contemporary with the height of Templar influence. Yet here lies the fascinating heart of the dilemma. Science could confirm the when, but it could not definitively confirm the who. The Louvre's sword is unquestionably old enough to have been carried by a Templar. Its style is appropriate for the period. The engraved cross is of a type they used, but these are all circumstantial evidence. The cross pate was not exclusively used by the Templars. It was a common Christian symbol adopted by other orders and even secular knights. Without that golden ticket, a provenance document directly linking it to a specific commandery, or an archaeological find placing it in a Templar context, absolute certainty remains just out of reach. It is entirely plausible that this sword belonged to a different, unknown crusader or a European knight who simply favored the style. So what is the final verdict? The Louvre, like many responsible institutions, navigates this ambiguity with careful language. The sword is typically displayed as a fine example of a 13th century longsword, with a label that might note its association with the Templar order rather than a firm declaration of ownership. This case is a powerful reminder that authentication is rarely a simple binary of real or fake. Instead, it operates on a spectrum of probability. The scientific evidence places this sword firmly in the right time and place, making a Templar origin a compelling and perfectly reasonable possibility. But the lack of a definitive paper trail means it must remain in the category of attributed to rather than confirmed as. This honest acknowledgement of the limits of our knowledge, even with cutting-edge tools, is what makes the study of these relics so endlessly captivating. It underscores that the most rigorous conclusions often come from weaving together the hard data of science with the nuanced clues of history, a multidisciplinary approach that is our best defense against the legends of the past. This booming 19th century demand created a perverse incentive for incredible craftsmanship, not in the service of art but of deception. Skilled metalsmiths, woodcarvers, and scribes, many of whom were themselves experts in historical techniques, found a lucrative market in creating objects that catered to the romantic ideals of the era. They weren't crude con artists. They were artisans producing what the market desperately wanted to believe was real. A blacksmith might forge a stunning sword using period-appropriate methods, hammering wrought iron in a coal-fired forge, only to then meticulously engrave it with a Templar cross-pate that would never have been on the original. A cabinet maker could construct a reliquary box from centuries-old oak salvaged from a demolished medieval church, ensuring that any carbon dating would return the correct age for the wood, while the carved insignia on its lid was entirely invented. This practice of incorporating genuine antique materials is what makes these historical forgeries so notoriously difficult to unmask. They are, in a sense, Frankenstein's monsters of history, stitched together from authentic parts but forming a whole that never actually existed. The methods of these past masters continue to challenge modern experts because their work was so preternaturally good. They understood the visual language of age. They might bury a newly forged metal object in manure to accelerate the development of a convincing patina, or soak a document in tea to stain the paper and mimic the yellowing of centuries. They studied heraldry and Latin epigraphy to avoid simple mistakes, though sometimes their eagerness led to errors that are now telltale signs. An inscription might use a mix of Latin grammatical forms from different centuries, or a coat of arms might combine elements from families that were never allied. These small anachronisms are the clues that provenance researchers and historians hunt for, but the best forgeries are devoid of such obvious errors. In the present day, the battle has only evolved, moving from the artisan's workshop into the digital realm. Modern forgers have access to technologies their 19th century predecessors could never have imagined, and they use them to incredible effect. High-resolution 3D scanners can perfectly capture the dimensions and wear patterns of a known authentic artifact, allowing a forger to create a mold for a nearly identical copy. Advanced chemical treatments can replicate centuries of corrosion in a matter of days. Perhaps most insidiously, the Internet provides a global marketplace and a vast repository of historical information. A counterfeiter can now study detailed academic papers, high-resolution museum collection photographs, and auction records to perfect their designs and craft a backstory that is meticulously tailored to withstand initial scrutiny. This constant technological arms race means that museums cannot afford to be static in their defense. The authentication protocols that were cutting edge a decade ago may already be obsolete. As a result, institutions are increasingly investing in advanced, non-destructive testing technologies like portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometers and 3D microscopy, which can analyze an object's surface in incredible detail without so much as touching it. They also prioritize ongoing education for their curators and conservators, ensuring they are aware of the latest forgery techniques circulating in the underground market. Furthermore, collaboration between museums has become a key weapon. Databases of known forgeries are now shared internationally, allowing an object that appears for sale in London to be quickly cross-referenced with a confirmed fake that was identified in New York the previous year. This collective vigilance is essential in an era where a single convincing forgery can undermine public trust and pollute the historical record. The goal is no longer to achieve a state of perfect certainty, but to build a dynamic, ever-adapting system of defense against an equally adaptive opponent. Walking through the hushed, hallowed halls of a museum, we place an immense amount of trust in the institution. We believe the stories they tell us, the histories they present behind glass. But what happens when the very experts in charge of those collections aren't entirely sure of the story themselves? This is the daily reality for curators responsible for Templar relics, where the line between historical fact and compelling fiction is often deliberately and ethically blurred. The decision of whether to display an object with a questionable past is not taken lightly. It's a complex balancing act between the duty to educate and the responsibility to avoid misleading the public. On one side of the scale is the undeniable educational value of an object. Even a relic with a dubious connection to the Templars can serve as a powerful teaching tool, a tangible gateway into discussing the Order's material culture, the medieval period's craftsmanship, and the very history of forgery itself. It can spark curiosity and inspire deeper learning, but on the other side of that scale is a significant risk, the risk of perpetuating myths, of lending the museum's immense authority to a narrative that might be more legend than history, and ultimately, of eroding public trust if the truth later emerges. To navigate this tightrope, museums have developed a nuanced language of labels and display contexts. You will rarely see a placard that states definitively, "Sword of a Knight Templar." Instead, careful phrasing like "attributed to," "in the style of," or possibly associated with does the heavy lifting. These might seem like small words, but they carry enormous ethical weight. They are a quiet admission of uncertainty, a signal to the astute visitor that the full story is not known, and that what they are seeing is an interpretation based on the best available evidence, not an incontrovertible fact. Some institutions take an even more conservative approach. If an object's provenance is too fragmented, its scientific analysis too inconclusive, or its history too mired in modern myth-making, a curator might choose to exclude it from public display altogether, keeping it in the study collection for academic research only. This ensures the public gallery remains a space of vetted, though sometimes still debated, historical representation. This commitment to transparency is crucial for maintaining the museum's role as a trusted source of knowledge, but it comes with a practical cost. There's no denying that the unqualified, romantic claim of Templar sword has a much stronger pull on the public imagination than the more cautious 13th century longsword, possibly associated with a crusading order. The allure of mystery, the direct connection to a famous and secretive group, is a powerful draw for visitors. In an era where museums compete for attendance and funding, there is an undeniable tension between ethical rigor and blockbuster appeal. A curator must constantly ask, does presenting this object with all its uncertainties still serve a greater educational purpose, or are we simply trading integrity for ticket sales? How these questions are answered reveals a great deal about an institution's philosophy. Is its primary goal to present a clean, definitive narrative, or to invite the public into the messy, investigative, and wonderfully uncertain process of history itself. This behind-the-scenes ethical landscape sets the stage for understanding the different characters in this story, the major museums around the globe that have chosen to steward these controversial treasures and present them to the world, each in their own unique way. While the scientific and historical analysis of these relics often happens behind closed doors in conservation labs, the public encounter with the Templar story most frequently occurs in the grand galleries of the world's great museums. Institutions across Europe, in particular, have become the modern-day guardians of objects attributed to the order, each offering a unique perspective on their legacy and presenting visitors with a tangible, if sometimes ambiguous, connection to this distant past. The approach these museums take varies dramatically, reflecting their different institutional philosophies and the specific nature of the artifacts in their care. In London, the British Museum offers a masterclass in documentary certainty with its display of a Templar seal matrix. This small, leaden seal, used to authenticate official documents, is a powerhouse of provenance. It is intricately engraved with the image of the Dome of the Rock, known to the Crusaders as the Templum Domini, and the Latin inscription, Sigillum Militum Expisti, meaning seal of the soldiers of Christ. Its history is remarkably clear, having been found in the bed of the River Thames near the site of the Order's preceptory in London. This direct archaeological link to a known Templar site, combined with its flawless iconography, makes it one of the most securely authenticated Templar objects in any public collection. It requires no qualifiers or cautious language. It is simply and confidently presented for what it is, a genuine piece of Templar administrative history. A short journey across the Channel brings us to Paris and the magnificent Musée de Cluny, officially the National Museum of the Middle Ages. Here, the atmosphere is more nuanced. The museum holds several items traditionally associated with the Templars, including architectural fragments from their Paris temple and a few seals. However, the star of the show is often a stunning, if controversial, head reliquary. Carved from wood and depicting a bearded man, it has long been informally linked to the accusations of idol worship, the so-called Baphomet, leveled against the order during their trials. The museum's presentation is characteristically careful and scholarly. While the object itself is an undeniable masterpiece of medieval sculpture, the link to the Templars is treated as part of its complex reception history, a fascinating story in itself, rather than as a confirmed fact. The label text invites visitors to consider the legend while understanding the distinction between tradition and verified history. Then there is the Vatican Museums, an institution whose very identity is intertwined with the history of the Church, the Templars' ultimate authority. Its holdings are less about dramatic swords and more about the textual and symbolic foundations of the order. While public access to its deepest archives is restricted, it is known to possess papal bulls issued to the Templars, fragments of their financial records, and seals. The authentication here is inherent, an official document bearing the seal of a pope from the 13th century, found in the Vatican's own historical collections, carries a weight of provenance that is almost unimpeachable. The Vatican's role is less about proving authenticity and more about contextualizing these objects within the vast tapestry of church history, presenting the Templars as one of many military orders that operated under papal sanction. This global distribution of artifacts from London to Rome and beyond tells its own story. It is a physical map of the order's incredible reach, a testament to their network of commanderies that stretched from the Holy Land to the British Isles. For a visitor, standing before these cases is a powerful experience. You are not just looking at an old object, you are in the presence of something that was touched, used, and charged with meaning by individuals 7 centuries ago. Yet, this experience is also a lesson in critical thinking. It highlights the spectrum of certainty that exists within museum walls, from the ironclad evidence of the British Museum's seal to the evocative traditions upheld at the Musée de Cluny. This journey through the world's collections sets the stage perfectly for an examination of a relic that stands at the absolute pinnacle of historical verification, a document that single-handedly reshaped modern understanding of the Order's final days. Amidst the shadows of doubt and forgery that so often cloud the world of Templar relics, the Chinon parchment emerges as a singular, brilliant beacon of clarity. Its story begins not on a battlefield or in a treasure chest, but in the quiet, dusty recesses of the Vatican secret archives, where it lay misfiled and forgotten for nearly 7 centuries. It was the year 2001 when the respected paleographer Barbara Frail, conducting research, stumbled upon this remarkable document. It wasn't a grand sword or a golden chalice, but a piece of parchment covered in the precise, cursive Latin of a medieval scribe. Yet its contents would prove to be more explosive than any legendary treasure, for this was the transcript of a secret papal hearing, a meeting that fundamentally alters our understanding of the Templars' tragic end. The parchment itself is a record of the proceedings at Chinon Castle in France, dating to August of 1308. This was a critical moment. The Templar leadership, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, had been imprisoned for nearly a year, subjected to torture and coerced into confessing to heretical crimes. Pope Clement V, caught between the immense pressure from King Philip IV of France and his own duty to the Church, sent 3 cardinals to conduct a private inquiry. The Chinon parchment is their report. It details how the Templar leaders, given a chance to speak freely away from their tormentors, reaffirmed their Christian faith and denied the grotesque charges against them. Most significantly, the cardinals, acting on the Pope's full authority, granted them absolution and restored them to the sacraments and the unity of the Church. In essence, the Vatican itself had secretly cleared them of heresy. What makes the Chinon parchment the absolute gold standard of authenticity is its provenance, a term we've discussed but which finds its purest expression here. This isn't an object that surfaced in a 19th century auction with a dubious backstory. This is a document that never left the official, continuous custody of the papal chancery. Its provenance is the Vatican archive itself. It was written by papal officials for the Pope as part of the highest-level church business. It was filed alongside other correspondence from that tumultuous period, its authenticity vetted by the very institution that created it. There are no gaps to explain, no mysterious owners to account for. The chain of custody is pristine, unbroken from the moment the ink dried in 1308 to the moment it was rediscovered in 2001. This unimpeachable history is why no credible historian disputes its genuineness. It is quite simply one of the most important and verified medieval documents in existence. Its impact on Templar scholarship cannot be overstated. For centuries, the narrative of the Templars' dissolution was one of a corrupt order justly punished. The Chinon parchment shattered that simplicity. It revealed a pope trying to navigate an impossible political situation, attempting to find a path to save the order from a rapacious king, even as he was being forced to dismantle it. It shows the Templar leaders not as heretics, but as men broken by torture, desperately seeking reconciliation with the faith they had dedicated their lives to serving. This single piece of parchment doesn't just tell us about an event. It forces a profound moral and historical reassessment of the entire tragedy, transforming the Templars from condemned criminals into victims of a brutal, politically motivated persecution. The power of the Chinon parchment lies in its stark contrast to the physical objects we usually associate with relics. A sword can be studied and dated, but its story is always incomplete. A document like this is the story, written in the moment by the participants themselves. It demonstrates that the most valuable relic is sometimes not a weapon or a jewel, but a piece of paper that carries the unvarnished voice of the past. It sets a benchmark for what true, undisputed provenance looks like, a benchmark against which all other purported Templar artifacts must be measured. And as we turn from this paragon of historical truth, we are inevitably drawn toward those objects that dwell in the far murkier waters of tradition and tantalizing but unproven legend. In stark contrast to the unimpeachable provenance of the Chinon parchment, we find objects shrouded in tantalizing mystery, artifacts whose stories are woven more from thread than fact. A prime example of this is the so-called Templar head of Sidon. This peculiar relic, often a carved stone or wooden head depicting a bearded man, surfaces in various private collections and smaller museums, almost always accompanied by a dramatic tale. The story goes that this is a representation of the mysterious idol the Templars were accused of worshipping during their trials, referred to in some confessions as Baphomet. This head, the legend claims, was venerated in secret ceremonies, a symbol of the order's alleged turn to heresy and dark practices. It's a narrative straight out of a Gothic novel, perfectly designed to capture the imagination and fuel the fires of conspiracy. The problem, however, is that this compelling story is built on a foundation of sand, with almost no historical evidence to support it. The journey of one such head, examined by experts, is a textbook case of how folklore can completely overshadow empirical fact. The artifact itself was skillfully carved with a somber, weathered expression that seemed to whisper of ancient secrets. Its owner, a passionate collector, genuinely believed in its Templar origins, a belief bolstered by local stories and its undocumented presence in a European estate for generations. To the naked eye, it felt old, it felt authentic, and its story was irresistibly glamorous. However, when subjected to scientific scrutiny, the romantic narrative quickly unraveled. Radiocarbon dating was performed on a tiny sample of the wood, a process that measures the decay of radioactive carbon isotopes to determine the age of organic material. The results were definitive and disappointing for the owner. The tree from which this head was carved had died centuries after the Templar order was dissolved. This was not a relic from the 1300s. It was a creation of the 16th or even 17th century, a product of the Renaissance or Baroque era, not the High Middle Ages. This revelation is Chinese letter, or typical of a much broader pattern. The accusation of head worship was a central, sensationalist part of the charges fabricated by King Philip IV's inquisitors to demonize the Templars. In the centuries that followed, this specific accusation captured the public's imagination, creating a powerful and enduring archetype. As a result, artisans in later periods began creating these carved heads. Their motivations were varied. Some may have been crafting devotional objects for entirely different purposes that were later misidentified. Others, particularly from the 19th century onward, were almost certainly creating deliberate forgeries to satisfy a growing collector's market obsessed with Templar mythology. The object itself wasn't a complete fake, it was genuinely antique, but its purported history was a complete fabrication. Its connection to the Templars was not based on provenance but on projection, a desire to physically possess a piece of the dark legend. The story of the Sidon head and others like it serves as a crucial cautionary tale. It reminds us that an object's age does not automatically confirm its story. A 500-year-old carving is historically significant in its own right, but it cannot be a 700-year-old Templar artifact. These cases underscore the immense importance of separating the artifact from the aura, the physical object from the layers of narrative that have been applied to it over time. They emphasize why museums and historians must approach every dramatic claim with a healthy dose of skepticism, prioritizing evidence over allure. This necessary skepticism, however, often clashes with a powerful external force, the deeply ingrained public perception of the Templars, a perception increasingly shaped not by academic texts, but by the compelling and often misleading world of popular culture. This powerful intersection of history and Hollywood creates a fascinating, if challenging, dynamic for the modern museum. On one hand, this surge of interest is a tremendous opportunity. It brings people through the doors who might never have considered visiting a medieval history exhibit, their curiosity piqued by a thrilling novel or a blockbuster film. This is a chance to engage a whole new audience, to use that initial spark of excitement as a gateway to genuine historical education. But on the other hand, it creates a significant pressure point. Museum directors and curators are not immune to the realities of funding and attendance metrics. There's an undeniable temptation to lean into the popularity, to display an object with a sensational but poorly supported Templar connection because the placard reading, possibly a Templar treasure, is guaranteed to draw more eyes and generate more revenue than one that honestly states 19th century decorative sword. This pressure can sometimes lead to a subtle but dangerous blurring of lines within the exhibit itself. Theatrical lighting, dramatic music in audio guides, and labeled text that leans heavily on phrases like "shrouded in mystery" or "whispered to have been owned by" can all serve to amplify the legend while downplaying the historical facts. The object itself becomes a prop in a narrative that prioritizes atmosphere over accuracy. This doesn't necessarily mean institutions are being deliberately deceptive. Often, it's a well-intentioned attempt to make history feel exciting and accessible. But the cumulative effect is a public that becomes increasingly accustomed to, and even expects, a version of the past that is more about plot twists and hidden meanings than it is about the complex, often ambiguous, reality uncovered by research. For the experts, the historians, curators, and scientists, this pop culture landscape creates a unique communication hurdle. How do you tell an enthusiastic visitor that the Grail myth is a literary invention, or that there's no evidence the Templars discovered some earth-shattering secret, without sounding like you're dismissing their interest or ruining their fun? It requires a delicate balancing act. The goal isn't to debunk and dismiss, but to redirect that sense of wonder. A skilled educator can acknowledge the appeal of the story from the Da Vinci Code while then guiding the conversation towards something even more fascinating, the truth. They can explain that the real history of the Templars, their rise as international bankers, their political machinations, their tragic downfall, is a drama every bit as compelling as any fiction, and it has the added weight of being real. This educational mission is perhaps one of the most critical roles a museum plays in the modern age, acting as a bulwark against misinformation by fostering critical thinking and a more nuanced appreciation for how we know what we know about the past. Ultimately, navigating the influence of pop culture is about managing expectations and honoring the visitor's intelligence. It's about trusting that the public can handle complexity and uncertainty, and that the genuine story, when presented with skill and passion, is more than capable of standing on its own merits. This challenge of separating compelling fiction from verifiable fact is not unique to history museums. It's a fundamental skill of modern literacy. By openly addressing the myths and explaining the evidence, museums do more than just authenticate artifacts. They help authenticate the very process of historical inquiry itself. This commitment to clear communication amidst a sea of sensationalism underscores why the work of understanding the past is never done in isolation. It demands a confluence of expertise, a meeting of minds from vastly different disciplines, all working in concert to piece together a puzzle that no single field could solve alone. In the high-stakes world of authenticating Templar relics, no single expert holds all the keys. It's a field where the art historian's trained eye is just as crucial as the chemist's mass spectrometer, and where the archivist's discovery in a dusty ledger can give context to an archaeologist's dig findings. This isn't a relay race where one specialist hands off the baton to the next. It's a symphony of simultaneous investigation, with each discipline playing its part to create a harmonious and conclusive whole. Imagine a single object arriving at a museum lab, a sealed chest, for instance, adorned with a faded red cross. The art conservator would be the first to assess its surface, noting the construction of the joints, the tool marks, and the style of the iron fittings, all to place it within a specific period of medieval craftsmanship. But their observations, while informed, are a starting point, not an end point. While the conservator is meticulously documenting the chest's physicality, a materials scientist would be preparing for analysis. Using a portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, they would scan the metal hinges and lock, instantly generating a readout of the alloy's elemental composition. If the scan reveals traces of zinc, a metal not commonly used in this way until centuries after the Templars, it raises an immediate red flag. But what if the metals check out as period appropriate? The investigation only deepens. A dendrochronologist might be called upon to take a microscopic core sample from the wooden planks. By analyzing the pattern of tree rings, they can often pinpoint not just the century the tree was felled, but sometimes the exact decade and even the forest region it came from. This data could reveal if the wood is too young to be Templar, or if it originated in a forest known to supply a specific commandery. Meanwhile, a historian specializing in medieval Latin and sigillography, the study of seals, would be scrutinizing any wax remnants or impressions on the chest. They could decipher the inscription, compare the emblem to known Templar seals from charters in the Vatican archives, and verify if the linguistic style and titles used match those from the 13th century. Perhaps the seal depicts a specific preceptory like Acre in the Holy Land. The historian's deep knowledge provides the crucial narrative framework, the who, what, and where that the scientific data alone cannot. This collaborative back and forth is where the true magic happens. The scientist's data confirms the historian's hypothesis, or conversely, the historian's research questions an anomalous scientific reading, prompting a second, more refined test. It's a self-correcting system of checks and balances that dramatically reduces the chance of error. This interdisciplinary model is particularly vital for the most ambiguous and tantalizing objects, those that aren't clear-cut forgeries but don't boast a perfect provenance either. A sword might have the correct metallurgical signature, but its hilt might be stylistically inconsistent with other verified examples. In such a case, the team must convene. The metallurgist confirms the blade is old, the art historian suggests the hilt may be a later replacement, and the historian searches for records of medieval armorers repairing weapons. Together, they might arrive at a nuanced conclusion. The blade is a genuine Templar-era artifact, but it was likely remounted in the 15th century, its new hilt engraved with a cross to honor its perceived history. This collaborative verdict is far more accurate and honest than any single expert could ever provide alone. painting a richer, more complex picture of an object's long life and ensuring the story presented to the public is not just compelling but rigorously vetted. Even as we marvel at the traditional tools of authentication, a quiet revolution is unfolding in research labs and digital archives, one that promises to transform provenance research from a painstakingly manual craft into a dynamic, interconnected science. This shift is powered by emerging digital technologies that can process information at a scale and speed utterly unimaginable to previous generations of historians. At the forefront is artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning algorithms designed for pattern recognition. Imagine feeding an AI system thousands of high-resolution images of medieval seals, swords, and manuscript illuminations. The algorithm isn't looking for what it already knows. It's learning to see what human eyes have consistently overlooked. It can analyze the microscopic wear patterns on a sword hilt, cross-reference them with a database of thousands of other hilts, and identify that the grip wear most closely matches artifacts from a specific region of France, suggesting a possible origin point. It can scan thousands of digitized parchment fragments, recognizing the unique quirks of a scribe's handwriting or the chemical signature of a specific ink across multiple documents, potentially linking a relic to a previously unknown inventory list or charter. This isn't about replacing the art historian's nuanced eye, but about giving them a powerful new lens, one that can detect faint echoes and connections across continents and centuries. Alongside AI's analytical power, another technology is emerging to solve the fundamental problem of trust in the artifact's journey: blockchain. While often associated with cryptocurrency, at its core, blockchain is simply a secure, decentralized, and tamper-proof digital ledger. Applied to provenance, it offers a radical new model for documenting an object's life story. The concept is elegantly simple. When an artifact is first discovered or officially authenticated, a unique digital record, a token, is created for it on a blockchain. Every subsequent transaction, every change of ownership, every exhibition it appears in, and every new scientific analysis performed on it can be recorded as a new, permanent, and unchangeable entry in this chain. This creates an immutable passport that travels with the object forever. For a Templar relic with a problematic 19th century history, a blockchain record could theoretically trace its path back through every auction house and private collection, eliminating the gaps and forgeries that plague traditional paper trails. It wouldn't erase past deceptions, but it would make future ones virtually impossible, bringing a new level of transparency and security to the entire field. These digital tools also enable the creation of vast, collaborative international databases, breaking down the silos that have long hindered research. A curator in Lisbon can upload the high-resolution 3D scan of a seal, and an algorithm can instantly compare its dimensions and wear patterns against a centralized database containing scans from the British Museum, the Louvre, and smaller regional collections. This could reveal that two seals, long thought to be from different commanderies, were actually struck from the same matrix, indicating a much closer relationship than previously known. Or it could instantly flag a newly surfaced artifact as a potential match for an item reported missing or stolen decades ago. This collaborative, data-driven approach transforms provenance research from a solitary pursuit into a global, crowdsourced investigation, leveraging the collective knowledge of the world's institutions to protect and understand our shared cultural heritage. Of course, these technologies are not a magic bullet, and their application to medieval artifacts is still in its pioneering stages. The initial creation of these vast datasets requires the digitization of millions of fragile documents and artifacts, a monumental and expensive undertaking. There are also complex questions of data ownership, standardization, and access that the academic community is only beginning to grapple with. An algorithm is only as good as the data it's trained on, and if that data contains the biases and errors of past scholarship, it risks simply automating those same mistakes. Furthermore, the cold, hard data from a scan or an algorithm must always be interpreted within the warm, nuanced context of human history. A statistical match is a clue, not a conclusion. It is the starting point for deeper human investigation, not the end of it. Yet, despite these challenges, the direction is unmistakable. The future of authentication lies in this powerful synergy between human expertise and digital capability, between the connoisseur's intuition and the algorithm's flawless memory, offering a promise of greater accuracy and transparency in our understanding of the past. This digital evolution doesn't just change how we track objects, it reshapes the very ecosystem of ownership and study, bringing the often opaque world of private collectors into a new and much sharper focus. While museums represent the public face of history, a parallel and often more secretive world exists where the fate of Templar relics is decided, the high-stakes arena of private collectors and auction houses. This realm has always been a double-edged sword for historians. On one hand, private collectors have often been the unsung heroes of preservation, rescuing artifacts from obscurity, neglect, or even destruction long before major institutions recognized their value. Their passion and resources have saved countless objects that might otherwise have been lost to time. Many of the most important pieces in museum collections today were first lovingly preserved in private hands for generations. These collectors operate with a freedom that museums, bound by budgets and bureaucratic committees, often lack, allowing them to act quickly to secure a significant find. Yet this very same environment can also be a fertile ground for obscurity and deception. The auction house floor, with its theatrical atmosphere of hushed bids and dramatic hammer falls, is fundamentally a theater of commerce. The primary goal is to achieve the highest possible price, and sometimes the compelling narrative of a story can outweigh the dry details of documented proof. A sword presented as believed to be Templar with a romantic, if unverified, backstory will inevitably fetch a higher price than the same sword accurately labeled as a 14th century European longsword. This creates a powerful incentive for sellers to be deliberately vague or to embellish an object's history, knowing that a hint of Templar mystery is a powerful financial accelerant. Provenance details might be withheld, glossed over, or presented in a way that implies more than it states, leaving crucial gaps in the object's history conveniently in the shadows. This opacity creates a significant challenge for museums. When an incredible artifact surfaces at auction, curators and acquisition committees must perform a delicate and rapid dance. They must evaluate the object's authenticity and value with often limited access for thorough testing, compete with deep-pocketed private bidders, and navigate the seller's potential reluctance to reveal the full provenance trail, perhaps to protect a previous owner's privacy or to avoid revealing a less than glamorous origin story. A museum's duty of due diligence to ensure an object wasn't looted or illegally exported can be nearly impossible to fulfill if the auction house cannot or will not provide a transparent and complete ownership history. This means that potentially genuine and important Templar relics can disappear into private collections, removed from public view and scholarly study for decades, their secrets locked away behind closed doors. However, a promising shift is underway, driven by a new generation of ethical collectors and forward-thinking auction houses. There is a growing recognition that the true value of these artifacts lies not just in their monetary worth, but in their historical significance and the knowledge they can unlock. Ethical collectors are increasingly choosing to partner with museums and universities before a purchase, seeking expert verification and sharing their findings. They may lend pieces for exhibition and study, or even bequeath them to public institutions, understanding that this collaboration ensures the object's long-term preservation and contributes to the broader historical record. In turn, reputable auction houses like Sotheby's and Christie's have significantly bolstered their in-house research teams and provenance requirements, understanding that their reputation for integrity is their most valuable asset. They now often work directly with external academics to vet important pieces, producing detailed, footnoted catalog entries that present both the evidence and the uncertainties with scholarly honesty. This growing alliance between the public trust of museums and the resources and passion of the private sector represents the most hopeful path forward, one where the shared goal of preserving truth ultimately outweighs the temptation of a profitable mystery. Navigating the world of Templar relics isn't just a matter of historical and scientific verification. It is also a journey through a complex and often contentious legal and ethical landscape. Modern museums are no longer the freewheeling treasure houses of the past, able to acquire objects based solely on their beauty or historical significance. Today, they operate under a growing body of international law and a powerful ethical imperative that demands they know not just what an object is, but where it came from and how it came to be on the market. This framework adds a profound and necessary layer of responsibility to the entire authentication process, transforming it from a purely academic pursuit into an act of historical stewardship and ethical accountability. At the heart of this framework are international agreements like the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property. This landmark treaty, ratified by over 140 countries, fundamentally changed the rules of the game. It recognizes that cultural heritage is not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but an integral part of a nation's identity, and that the illicit trade in artifacts fuels looting, destroys archaeological sites, and severs the vital connection between an object and its historical context. For a Templar relic, this has significant implications. While the Knights Templar were a pan-European organization, their physical remains are inextricably linked to the soil of specific modern nations. A sword unearthed in Cyprus, a seal discovered in Israel, or architectural fragments from a commandery in France are all considered part of that country's cultural patrimony. Removing such items without explicit export permission is illegal, and any museum acquiring them without verifying their legal export status is effectively dealing in stolen property, regardless of the object's age or the purity of their intentions. This legal reality directly shapes acquisition policies. Before a museum even considers the cost of a potential Templar artifact, its curators and lawyers must embark on a rigorous provenance investigation that goes far beyond establishing historical ownership. They must construct a watertight history of the object's movement across borders, demanding concrete proof that it was legally exported from its country of origin. This often requires original export licenses, dated bills of sale from reputable dealers, and a clear chain of custody that leaves no gaps, especially during periods of conflict or political instability. A relic that surfaced on the international market shortly after the Second World War, for example, would be subject to intense scrutiny, as this was a period notorious for the looting of both public and private collections. The burden of proof is squarely on the acquiring institution to demonstrate that an object was not looted or illegally trafficked. This due diligence is not just a legal formality. It is a moral obligation to ensure that the museum's collection is not built upon a foundation of historical theft or contemporary crime. The ethical dimension extends beyond strict legality into grayer but equally important areas of conscience. Many museums have adopted acquisition policies that are even stricter than the law requires. They may refuse to acquire any object that lacks a documented provenance reaching back before 1970, the year of the UNESCO Convention, effectively creating a bright ethical line. Others apply the same standard to objects that changed hands during the Nazi era, recognizing the need to rectify historical injustices. For a Templar relic with a murky 20th century history, this ethical stance can be a significant barrier to acquisition, regardless of how genuine the artifact may be. A museum might be presented with a stunning sword that passes every scientific test with flying colors, but if its ownership history between 1940 and 1970 is a complete mystery, an ethical institution will likely walk away, prioritizing its integrity over the desire to possess a masterwork. This commitment to transparency and ethical collecting is how modern museums build and maintain public trust, demonstrating that their role is to serve as guardians of history, not merely consumers of its most attractive fragments. This complex interplay of law and ethics profoundly impacts the authentication process itself. A problematic provenance is no longer just a historical curiosity, it can be a disqualifying factor. An authentication committee must now ask not only, is this real, but also, was this obtained in a way that aligns with our institutional values? An object with a history of illegal excavation or export is tainted, and no amount of scientific verification can cleanse it of that original sin. This holistic approach ensures that the stories museums tell are not only accurate but also honorable, preserving the past with a conscience as clear as their scholarship. This rigorous, multifaceted vetting process naturally leads us to wonder how it is all organized. What does this step-by-step protocol actually look like when a potential Templar treasure arrives at a museum's door? So what does this rigorous, multi-stage investigation actually look like in practice when a new object arrives at a museum's door? The journey of a potential Templar relic from an unprovenanced curiosity to a vetted exhibit follows a carefully orchestrated protocol, a forensic roadmap designed to peel back the layers of time and deception with methodical precision. It begins not in a glamorous gallery, but in a brightly lit, sterile examination room. Here, under the calm eyes of a seasoned art conservator, the object receives its first crucial assessment. This initial visual inspection is far more than a casual glance. It is a deeply knowledgeable appraisal that draws on decades of accumulated expertise. The conservator's trained eye searches for the story written in the object's very surface. They examine the wear patterns on a sword's hilt. Is the patina consistent with centuries of grip from a glove, or does it look artificially applied? They study the tool marks on a metal surface, looking for the telltale signs of modern machining that would be an instant giveaway of a fake. They note any repairs, alterations, or anachronistic stylistic elements that feel out of place for the purported period. This first step is intuitive and experience-based, a filter that can immediately flag obvious modern reproductions or clever pastiches before more expensive and time-consuming analysis is ever employed. Should the object pass this initial scrutiny, the investigation immediately pivots to the library and the archive. This is where provenance researchers, the historical detectives of the museum world, take up the trail. Their mission is to construct a timeline of ownership, a documented biography for the artifact. They scour international auction house records dating back centuries, decipher handwritten ledgers from old aristocratic collections, and correspond with archives across Europe, searching for any mention of the object. A bill of sale from 1880 might note a knightly sword with cross, or an inventory from a French chateau could list a carved head from the temple. Each document is a potential piece of the puzzle, a verifiable link in the chain. The goal is to bridge the gap from the present day all the way back to the early 14th century, or at the very least, to establish a clean and ethical history that proves the object wasn't looted or illegally trafficked in the modern era. Gaps in this timeline, especially during periods known for prolific forgery like the 19th century, are noted as significant areas of concern that will require extra proof from subsequent scientific analysis. With the historical paper trail mapped out as thoroughly as possible, the object then enters the domain of material science. In the conservation lab, it is subjected to a battery of non-invasive tests. A handheld X-ray fluorescence spectrometer is passed over a metal surface, instantly revealing its elemental composition and sniffing out any modern alloys. If the object has organic components, a leather grip on a dagger, a wooden reliquary box, a parchment document, minute samples may be taken for radiocarbon dating to pinpoint the year the source plant or animal died. Advanced imaging techniques like 3D microscopy can examine the micro-wear on a surface, distinguishing between natural centuries of aging and artificial distressing techniques. Each test generates hard, empirical data that either supports the historical narrative or introduces confusing contradictions that must be resolved. All of this accumulated evidence, the conservator's notes, the historian's provenance report, the scientist's data charts, is then compiled into a comprehensive dossier and presented to the museum's acquisitions committee. This body is typically composed of a diverse panel of internal curators, external academics, and often legal experts. Their role is not to prove the object is real, but to aggressively vet the evidence for any weaknesses, inconsistencies, or ethical red flags. They debate the findings, challenge assumptions, and weigh the probability of authenticity against the available proof. It is a process built on healthy skepticism and collective wisdom, designed to prevent any single individual's enthusiasm from overriding factual discrepancies. The committee's conclusion is rarely a simple yes or no. More often, it places the object on a spectrum of certainty. It might be deemed a secure Templar artifact, a likely example from the period, or an attributed piece with an interesting but unproven story. This final collaborative judgment acknowledges a fundamental truth of this work, that despite our best efforts, some mysteries are never fully solved, and some objects will forever dwell in the fascinating gray area between history and legend. This delicate dance of disclosure happens through a carefully crafted ecosystem of communication within the museum itself. Walk through any major exhibit featuring medieval artifacts, and you'll notice a distinct language on the placards. Gone are the days of absolute declarative statements. In their place, you find a nuanced vocabulary of probability. A sword might be labeled as 13th century European, accurately describing its physical attributes before adding, of a type used by the Knights Templar. This subtle phrasing does immense work. It grounds the object in a verifiable time and place while carefully framing its association with the famous order as a contextual possibility, not a proven fact. This is the museum speaking with integrity, choosing to educate rather than simply amaze. This commitment to transparency extends far beyond the text on a wall. Multimedia guides have become powerful tools for unpacking complexity. As a visitor stands before a display case, they can punch a number into their handheld device or scan a QR code with their phone. Instead of a simple description, they might hear a curator's voice explaining. The blade's metallurgy confirms it's from the right period. but the engraved cross is a style also used by other orders. This is why we can't say for certain it was a Templar's weapon. Suddenly, the visitor is invited behind the scenes, becoming a partner in the investigation rather than a passive recipient of a finished story. Public lectures and gallery talks further demystify the process. Experts regularly stand before these contested objects, openly discussing the evidence for and against their Templar connections, fielding questions, and acknowledging the limits of current knowledge. This transforms the museum from a temple of absolutes into a vibrant workshop of historical inquiry. This educational mission has never been more critical. In an age saturated with misinformation and sensationalist history programming, museums have a vital role to play as bastions of intellectual honesty. By openly communicating uncertainty, they perform a quiet but powerful act of public service. They model how to grapple with ambiguous evidence, how to weigh probabilities, and how to live with questions that may never have definitive answers. This fosters a more sophisticated and critical public, one that learns to approach bold historical claims, whether in a museum or online, with a healthy and informed skepticism. The goal is to replace the desire for a simple, thrilling story with a deeper appreciation for the complex, often messy, and always fascinating nature of how we understand the past. This honest approach acknowledges that the true story of an artifact isn't just about its origin in the Middle Ages, but also about its journey through centuries of changing ownership, interpretation, and belief. A journey that often varies dramatically depending on where in the world the object finally comes to rest. This fascinating tapestry of communication and transparency reveals that the story of a Templar relic is never just one story. It changes shape and meaning as it travels across borders, filtered through the unique lens of each culture that encounters it. In Europe, where the physical remnants of the Templars are woven directly into the landscape, these artifacts are often treated as vital pieces of national heritage. In France, for instance, a sword or a seal is not just a medieval object. It is a tangible link to a specific, powerful chapter in the nation's own formation, a relic of a time when the French crown clashed with a supranational power and emerged transformed. The authentication process here is deeply intertwined with a sense of local pride and historical continuity. An object discovered in the ruins of a French commandery might be embraced with less stringent skepticism because it fits a cherished and well-documented local narrative, its value measured as much by its contribution to a national story as by its universal historical significance. Travel to the Iberian Peninsula and the narrative shifts again. In Spain and Portugal, Templar relics are frequently viewed through the enduring legacy of the Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign to reclaim the peninsula from Islamic rule. Here, a knight's spurs or a fragment of a castle wall is less about international banking and more about the very spirit of the crusade, symbolizing a defining struggle that shaped national identities. This cultural context can elevate the symbolic value of an artifact, sometimes leading to a greater willingness to accept traditional attributions that might be questioned under a more dispassionate, universal standard. The local story, the legend passed down through generations, carries a weight that interacts with and sometimes challenges the empirical evidence presented by science. But step outside of Europe, and the cultural perspective on these objects undergoes another profound transformation. In the Middle East, particularly in regions that were once the Crusader states, Templar relics carry a vastly different symbolic charge. A sword unearthed in Israel or a coin found in Syria is not primarily a treasure of chivalric romance. It is an artifact of invasion, colonization, and conflict. It represents a complex history of cultural exchange, to be sure, but also one of violence and religious war. The process of authentication in these regions is therefore charged with a different kind of gravity. It becomes an act of reclaiming and recontextualizing history, often prioritizing the narrative of the invaded over that of the invader. An institution in Beirut or Jerusalem might be far more cautious about glorifying a Templar weapon, instead choosing to present it within a broader context of medieval Mediterranean interaction, emphasizing the perspectives of the Arab and Byzantine cultures the Crusaders encountered and often clashed with. This global patchwork of perspectives fundamentally shapes the entire ecosystem of authentication. It means that there is no single, objective truth about a relic's value or meaning waiting to be uncovered. A panel of experts in Lisbon might interpret the same set of data on a seal differently than a panel in London or Jerusalem, influenced by the unspoken cultural currents that prioritize different aspects of the past. This isn't a failure of scholarship, it is a recognition that history is always a conversation between the past and the present, and the questions we ask of an artifact are inevitably shaped by who we are and where we stand. Acknowledging this cultural dimension doesn't weaken the pursuit of truth, it enriches it, adding layers of meaning and reminding us that an object's biography includes not only its medieval creation but also its modern reception. This beautiful, complex interplay between universal evidence and local interpretation finds a powerful new expression as we move from the physical gallery into the limitless, borderless realm of the digital. Imagine a world where the most fragile Templar relic, a parchment so delicate that light alone could damage it, can be studied in minute detail by a scholar in Tokyo while simultaneously being explored by a curious student in Rio de Janeiro. This is no longer the stuff of science fiction. It is the present-day reality made possible by high-resolution 3D scanning and photogrammetry. These technologies allow conservators to create perfect digital twins, high-fidelity virtual replicas that capture every scratch on a blade, every fiber in a piece of cloth, and every faint groove in a wax seal with astonishing accuracy. This isn't a simple photograph. It's an interactive, rotatable, zoomable model that can be virtually disassembled, revealing construction techniques and hidden details invisible to the naked eye. For preservation, the benefits are immense. Priceless originals can be retired to carefully controlled environments, safe from the wear and tear of travel and public display, while their digital ambassadors carry the burden of education and engagement to a global audience. This incredible access, however, introduces a fascinating and complex philosophical dilemma. The German philosopher Walter Benjamin famously wrote about the aura of a work of art, that unique sense of awe and presence we feel when standing before an original object, knowing it was touched by history. There is an undeniable, almost magical charge in realizing you are breathing the same air as a sword that might have been wielded at the siege of Acre. A digital replica, for all its perfections, inherently lacks this aura. It is a copy, a ghost of the original. Museums now grapple with how to communicate this distinction without diminishing the value of the digital experience. The goal is not to replace the awe of the original, but to complement it with a new form of access, creating a tiered system of engagement where the digital copy serves as an introduction, a study aid, and a preservation tool, while the physical object remains the ultimate, revered source. The potential of these digital assets expands far beyond a single object on a screen. They are the building blocks for entire virtual museums and immersive online exhibitions. With a VR headset, you could soon find yourself standing in a digitally reconstructed Templar commandery, examining a virtual display case containing perfect replicas of artifacts that are, in reality, scattered across a dozen different countries in separate collections. This allows for a holistic storytelling that is physically impossible in the real world, reuniting objects that haven't been together in centuries. These virtual spaces can also recreate historical contexts that have long since vanished, placing a relic within the chapel or treasury it was originally designed for, offering a depth of understanding that a sterile museum case simply cannot provide. The educational power is staggering, breaking down geographical and economic barriers to culture in an unprecedented way. Yet, this powerful new tool demands a renewed commitment to ethical transparency. As virtual experiences become more immersive and convincing, the line between real and rendered can easily blur. A museum's most sacred duty in this new digital age is to clearly and consistently label what is authentic and what is a reconstruction. Every digital model must be accompanied by metadata stating it is a reproduction, and every virtual environment must distinguish between scanned elements from real objects and artistic interpretations or digital recreations of lost spaces. This honesty is crucial to maintaining public trust and ensuring that the excitement of digital exploration doesn't come at the cost of historical accuracy. We must avoid creating a world where the flawless, idealized digital copy becomes more real to people than the authentic, imperfect, and fragile original object that survives against all odds. This digital evolution forces us to confront a much deeper question that has been simmering beneath the surface of this entire investigation. If a perfect digital twin contains all the visual and dimensional information of the original, and can be studied more closely and safely than the real thing, what truly constitutes the authenticity of a relic? Is it the physical matter itself, the specific atoms of iron and wood that have survived the centuries, or is it the information the object contains, its shape, its story, its craftsmanship? In a world increasingly comfortable with digital existence, the concept of authenticity is undergoing a profound shift. The value may soon be seen not in exclusive access to the physical object, but in the guaranteed accuracy and richness of the data that represents it. This doesn't diminish the original. Instead, it democratizes its story, ensuring that the legacy of the Templars is preserved not just in a handful of glass cases, but in the boundless, shared digital realm of human knowledge. But if we shift our perspective from the material to the symbolic, the entire conversation transforms. Consider an object like a 19th-century ceremonial sword, crafted for a fraternal order that claimed descent from the Templars. Scientifically, it's a modern artifact. Its provenance begins and ends in the 1800s. Yet, for the members of that order, that sword was a powerful, authentic link to an idealized chivalric past. It was used in rituals that gave their lives meaning and connected them to a centuries-old tradition. In this context, the object's authenticity isn't derived from its medieval origin, but from its function within a living cultural practice. It becomes real because of the genuine beliefs and emotions projected onto it, because of the role it plays in a community's shared identity. This illustrates a powerful philosophical idea that an object's aura can be bestowed upon it by its audience, by the stories we collectively agree to tell about it. This debate between material and narrative authenticity sits at the heart of modern curation. Museum professionals constantly navigate this tension. Do they display an object that is almost certainly a later creation because it perfectly encapsulates a powerful and enduring myth about the Templars? To exclude it entirely is to ignore a significant chapter in the reception of Templar history, how these knights have been imagined, reimagined, and mythologized across time. That very process of myth-making is itself a historical fact worthy of study, yet to display it without context is to risk perpetuating a falsehood. The solution often lies in a more expansive, nuanced presentation. A label might read, "Although this sword was made in the 19th century, it represents the powerful and enduring fascination with the Knights Templar that emerged during the Romantic era." This reframes the object. It is no longer presented as a medieval relic, but as a genuine artifact of a different, more recent historical phenomenon, the birth of a legend. In doing so, the museum honors both truth and tradition, acknowledging that the cultural life of an object is a vital part of its biography. Ultimately, the philosophy of authenticity challenges us to move beyond a simple binary of real versus fake. It invites us to see these objects as existing on a spectrum of meaning. On one end sits an object like the Chinon parchment, authentic in every conceivable way, materially, historically, and documentarily. On the other end rests a blatant, modern forgery created solely to deceive. But in the vast middle ground lies a fascinating array of artifacts whose value is more complex. A medieval sword blade fitted with a later hilt, a genuine 13th century cross that may or may not have been Templar, a Victorian-era painting depicting a highly romanticized Templar ceremony. Each of these objects carries a different kind of truth. The composite weapon tells a story of repair and continued use, of an object valued enough to be maintained across generations. The cross speaks to the common material culture of the Crusades, even if its specific ownership is lost. The painting is a priceless window into 19th century ideals and anxieties. Their authenticity isn't a single, static quality but a layered and multifaceted one, composed of age, craftsmanship, historical context, and the powerful, enduring stories we cannot help but tell. Beyond their physical form and verified history, Templar relics carry a symbolic weight that has proven far more enduring and powerful than the order itself. They have become potent vessels for ideals that resonate across centuries, unwavering courage in the face of overwhelming odds, a faith so profound it compelled men to travel across the known world, and an aura of mystery born from their sudden, violent erasure from history. A Templar sword is never just a piece of old metal. In the modern imagination, it is Excalibur, a symbol of righteous power wielded in a sacred cause. A cracked seal is not merely a lump of lead. It is a stamp of secret knowledge, a promise of hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. This transformation from historical artifact to cultural icon means these objects have long since escaped the confines of academic study, taking on a life of their own in the realms of folklore, fraternity, and fantasy. This powerful symbolism has directly inspired the creation of numerous modern organizations and fraternal orders that claim a spiritual or lineal descent from the medieval knights. Groups like the Freemasons and later offshoots such as the Knights Templar fraternity within certain Masonic rites consciously adopted the Templar name, imagery, and regalia not because of a proven historical connection, but because of what the Templars came to represent. They were drawn to the narrative of a brotherhood dedicated to higher principles, persecuted for their beliefs, and custodians of esoteric wisdom. For these groups, the authenticity of a relic isn't determined by radiocarbon dating. It is measured by its efficacy as a ritual object, its power to connect members to that idealized legacy during initiation ceremonies or formal gatherings. A modern-made ceremonial sword, crafted for a 21st century Templar-inspired group, is authentic in its ability to inspire feelings of camaraderie, tradition, and moral purpose among its members, demonstrating how the same symbol can hold two entirely different kinds of truth. This is where the museum's role evolves from authenticator to essential context provider, a crucial translator between the powerful pull of myth and the grounded reality of history. A curator's task is not to debunk or dismiss these modern interpretations, but to carefully delineate the boundaries between documented history and subsequent legacy. In a well-designed exhibit, you might see a genuine 13th century Templar seal displayed alongside the ceremonial jewel of a 19th century fraternal order. The labeling and interpretive text would clearly explain the vast chronological and functional gulf between them, while also exploring the fascinating cultural journey that connected the two. The museum acknowledges the power of the symbol while anchoring it in historical fact, allowing visitors to appreciate the romance of the legend without losing sight of the verifiable reality. This honest framing helps the public understand that the true legacy of the Templars is not a hidden treasure or a secret bloodline, but their demonstrable impact on medieval finance, international warfare, and the enduring human fascination with the interplay of faith, power, and mystery. Ultimately, this deep dive into symbolism explains why the meticulous, often painstaking work of authentication matters so profoundly beyond the halls of academia. In a world saturated with misinformation, the relentless pursuit of factual accuracy is an act of respect for the historical Templars themselves, for the complexity of the past, and for the public's desire to understand it. When a museum invests years and vast resources to confirm an object's provenance, it is defending the truth against the easy allure of a good story. It ensures that our connection to the past is built on a foundation of evidence rather than invention, allowing the genuine awe we feel when standing before a real relic to be all the more powerful because we know with confidence that it is real. This commitment to separating fact from fiction while honoring the power of both prepares us to consider the very tangible, modern implications of these artifacts beyond philosophy and symbolism and into the realm of economics and influence. The financial stakes surrounding a verified Templar relic are immense, transforming a historical artifact into a powerful economic engine for the institution that possesses it. When a museum can confidently display an object with a clear and undisputed connection to the order, it instantly becomes a blockbuster attraction. Visitors flock from around the world for the chance to stand before a tangible piece of this legendary history, driving ticket sales, membership sign-ups, and revenue from related merchandise, special exhibitions, and event bookings. This surge in attendance directly translates into increased funding, not only from gate receipts but also from heightened donor interest and sponsorship opportunities. Corporations and philanthropic individuals are far more likely to attach their name and resources to a celebrated, crowd-drawing exhibit than to a lesser-known collection. Furthermore, the prestige of housing such a significant artifact elevates the museum's entire profile, placing it on the international cultural map and strengthening its position when applying for competitive grants and academic partnerships. The authentication of a single object can, quite literally, secure the financial health and global reputation of an institution for years to come. This powerful economic incentive, however, creates a perilous ethical tightrope. The immense pressure to boost revenue and public engagement can, for some institutions, subtly shift priorities. The desire for a dramatic, crowd-pleasing exhibit might tempt a museum to downplay uncertainties or exhibit an item with a sensational but poorly supported backstory. The financial allure of a potential Templar blockbuster can risk encouraging a slide towards what critics call edutainment, where the thrilling narrative takes precedence over the less glamorous, nuanced truth. This is where the line between rigorous scholarship and commercial exploitation begins to blur. An object with a fascinating but ultimately fabricated legend might be acquired and displayed with a wink and a nudge, its labeled text carefully crafted to imply a connection it cannot factually sustain, all in the service of driving attendance numbers and generating buzz. In the most concerning scenarios, this pressure could even lead to the acquisition of artifacts with knowingly problematic provenance, turning a cultural institution into a vehicle for laundering the reputation of looted or illegally trafficked goods by placing them in a respected public context. Navigating this tension between commerce and conservation is a defining challenge for modern ethical institutions. The most respected museums in the world understand that their long-term credibility is their most valuable asset, far outweighing any short-term financial gain from a questionable display. They establish and adhere to strict internal acquisition policies and authentication protocols that are insulated from commercial pressures. Their curatorial decisions are led by scholarship, not marketing departments. This ethical commitment manifests in their public-facing work through radical transparency. Rather than hiding an object's ambiguous past, they make it a central part of the exhibit. Interactive displays might show the scientific testing process, wall text can explain the specific gaps in the provenance, and public lectures openly debate the evidence for and against the Templar connection. By inviting the public into the investigative process, these museums transform a potential weakness into a strength. They educate visitors on the complexities of historical research and build a deeper, more authentic form of engagement based on trust and intellectual curiosity, proving that integrity itself can be a powerful and sustainable draw. This responsible approach ensures that the economic power of these relics serves their educational mission, and not the other way around, safeguarding the truth for future generations. Looking ahead, the field of Templar relic authentication is poised on the brink of a revolution, powered by technologies that were once the domain of science fiction. One of the most promising frontiers is biomolecular analysis, particularly the study of ancient DNA and stable isotopes. Imagine a scenario where a small, invisible sample taken from the grip of a sword or the inner fibers of a reliquary could reveal not just the age of the materials, but the very geographic origin of the components. Isotopic tracing works by analyzing the unique chemical signatures locked within an object. Elements like strontium, lead, and oxygen exist in variant forms or isotopes that vary from region to region based on local geology and climate. These isotopes are absorbed into the food and water consumed by living things, and they become embedded in the materials those organisms produce. For a relic, this means the metal in a blade can be tested to trace the ore back to a specific mine, or the wool from a Templar mantle could be linked to the pastures where the sheep were raised. If historical records indicate a commandery in Provence sourced its iron from a local mine, and isotopic analysis of a sword confirms that origin, it creates a powerful, corroborating link that strengthens the case for authenticity immensely. Alongside this, the emerging field of ancient DNA analysis offers a window into the biological past of organic artifacts. While we may never extract DNA from a long-dead knight from the hilt of his sword, we can analyze the genetic material from other sources. Tiny fragments of skin, sweat, or blood can theoretically be recovered from the porous materials of a grip or the crevices of a jewel setting. More practically, we can study the DNA of the materials themselves. Parchment was made from animal skin, textiles from wool or linen. Sequencing the DNA from a fragment of a medieval charter could tell us the species of animal it came from, and even its genetic lineage, potentially linking it to herds known to be supplied to specific monastic communities. This moves authentication from the broad strokes of century and style to the pinpoint accuracy of biological and geological sourcing, allowing us to build a material biography of an object that is as detailed as its provenance paper trail. This data-driven future relies on a parallel revolution in digital collaboration. The current model of authentication is often siloed, with individual museums and researchers working in relative isolation. repeating efforts and struggling to share findings across institutional and national boundaries. The next great leap forward will be the creation of centralized, collaborative international databases. These would not be simple digital catalogs, but dynamic, linked repositories of information. Imagine a global digital ledger where every known Templar seal, every cross-pate design, every radiocarbon date, and every elemental analysis is uploaded and tagged. An art historian in Barcelona studying a newly discovered seal could run its image through a pattern recognition algorithm that instantly compares it to every other recorded Templar seal in the world, flagging potential matches or glaring anomalies. A conservator in Edinburgh could query the database to see if the unique alloy composition of a sword blade in their lab matches any other examples, potentially linking it to a specific workshop or region. This would drastically reduce duplication of effort, prevent the recycling of past forgeries, and create a powerful collective intelligence that is far greater than the sum of its parts. Underpinning all of this is the rapid advancement of digital archaeology and non-invasive scanning technologies. High-resolution LiDAR scanning is already being used to map the precise dimensions of Templar sites and castles, creating incredibly detailed 3D models. This data can be used to study architectural styles and construction techniques with unprecedented precision, creating a benchmark against which purported architectural fragments can be measured. Furthermore, advanced spectroscopic imaging techniques are being developed that can literally see beneath the surface without causing any damage. Hyperspectral imaging can reveal faded inscriptions or painted symbols on wood and stone that are completely invisible to the naked eye, while terahertz imaging can peer through corrosion layers on metal to examine the pristine surface beneath, potentially revealing makers' marks or signatures that have been hidden for centuries. These tools will allow us to interrogate relics for information without so much as touching them, preserving them for future generations while unlocking secrets we never knew they held. The ultimate goal of all these converging technologies is not to arrive at a sterile, purely scientific conclusion, but to build a richer, more nuanced, and profoundly human understanding of the Templar world. By combining the hard data of isotopes and DNA with the vast connective potential of digital archives and the detailed context provided by advanced imaging, we are moving towards a future where the biography of every artifact can be written with incredible detail. We will not only know that a sword is old, but we may understand the land its iron came from, the animal whose hide wraps its grip, and the workshop where it was forged. This deeper insight ensures the legacy of the Knights Templar is preserved not as a series of myths and mysteries, but as a tangible, verifiable, and endlessly fascinating chapter in human history, their story told with ever greater precision by the very objects they left behind. Tracing the authenticity and provenance of Templar relics is a multifaceted endeavor that blends history, science, ethics, and culture, revealing as much about our modern values as about the medieval past. This journey through laboratories and archives, court records and auction houses shows us that the question of what is real is never simple. It is a conversation between the object and the observer, between the documented fact and the powerful legend. Every scratch on a sword blade, every faded word on a parchment, every chemical signature hidden within metal is a clue in a grand, centuries-long detective story. The methods may have evolved from the simple observations of a 19th-century antiquarian to the atom-level precision of a mass spectrometer, but the driving force remains the same, an insatiable human curiosity to connect with a past that is both familiar and profoundly mysterious. From the Louvre's scrutinized sword, a masterpiece of martial craft whose origins remain tantalizingly just beyond definitive proof, to the definitive Chinon parchment, a document whose impeccable provenance reshaped our understanding of the Order's final days. Each artifact tells a story of human curiosity and rigor. These objects are monuments not only to the knights who wielded or created them, but to every historian, scientist, and curator who has dedicated their career to interrogating their secrets. They represent the painstaking work of comparing tree ring patterns, the long nights spent deciphering medieval Latin in dusty archives, and the collaborative debates in museum boardrooms where evidence is weighed and probabilities are argued. This relentless pursuit of accuracy is a form of deep respect for the past itself, for the complexity of truth, and for the public's right to understand its own history without the distortion of myth or the taint of commercial exploitation. So remember, the next time you stand before a relic in a hushed museum gallery, you're witnessing not just an object, but centuries of investigation and care. You are seeing the culmination of a human chain of inquiry that stretches back generations. That display case is a window, but it is also a stage where the drama of history continues to unfold, where questions outnumber answers, and where the line between fact and legend is constantly being redrawn by new discoveries. This ongoing conversation is what keeps history alive and vibrant, ensuring that the legacy of the Templars and all those who came before us is never truly finished. We encourage you to share your own thoughts on these enduring mysteries in the comments below, and to subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden truths. Your curiosity is the next chapter in this never-ending story.